Hello there everybody, my name is Marley Bird and in this video I will teach you how to make the Crochet family dog sweater. This super cute dog sweater is crocheted using some very simple stitches and some color changes to make a lovely yoke sweater for your dog. It comes in 3 different sizes, so depending on the size of your dog, you will choose which size to follow along and you will have no trouble at all completing this sweater. Now this is a free pattern available at yarnspirations.com. I've put a link in the video description box right down there below, and while you're down there, don't forget to smash that like button, as my kids say. All right, go ahead, grab that pattern, gather your materials, join me back here, and I will teach you everything you need to know to complete this cute dog sweater. I just love this little picture of the doggy in the sweater. It is just so adorable. Okay, this pattern calls for Red Heart Super Saver yarn in 4 different colors. It looks like you only need 2 balls of the main color, but all of the other ones you just need 1 ball. It also requires 2 different size hooks, and all that means is at some point in the pattern you will be changing hook sizes to obtain the correct gauge for that part of the sweater. If you need to change hook sizes to get the correct gauge, that is absolutely okay. We have this sweater written for a 10-inch chest size, 16-inch chest size, and a 24-inch chest size. So hopefully one of those will work for you and your dog. And then this is the given gauge that you can try to reach with the larger size hook. All right, we are going to go ahead and jump past all of this and come right here to the neck ribbing. And that neck ribbing is right here around this portion of the dog. It's kind of hard to see on that picture. So let's go to page 3. And if you look right down here, here is the neck ribbing, and it is made up of simple single crochets just worked through the back loop. So let's go ahead and grab our main color and our smaller hook. We begin with a slip knot directly onto our hook, so place a slip knot on your hook. And I do want to note that this hook size is relatively small for this worsted weight yarn, but we want these rib stitches to be nice and snug. You will go ahead and chain 8. Once you have those 8 chains completed, you will put a single crochet into the second chain from hook, okay? So I'm going to go skip that first one, go to the second one, and place a single crochet right there into that chain. Now I'll go to the next chain and place a single crochet there and in each of the chains all the way across this row. This is the one row that you are working through the full chain, or I am going through both legs of the chain. I think it looks good that way, but you can do whatever you want for this point because this will be seamed up to the last row that you do. Once you get to the end here, you have a little nubbin that looks just like that. You will go ahead and chain 1, and that does not count as a stitch, and turn your work. You can turn and chain 1, it's totally up to you. Okay, so row 2, this is the row you're going to be repeating. In the back leg or the back loop of each of these stitches, we will work 1 single crochet. Now here is a little note. As you get really comfortable working along this ribbing portion, your stitches tend to become a little bit more tight as you get further down. So as you are working into the back leg of each of these stitches, I do want to encourage you, when you bring up that final draw through, make sure that you're not keeping it like super snug, that it is nice and relaxed just like you were for the first one. So I pull up and I always just kind of make sure my loop goes to the size of my hook, and I kind of just like I fold it, not fold it, I kind of put it over like, yeah, that's about the size I want. Like I don't want it, see how that's a lot tighter, and that, like if I went like that, that's too loose. I kind of just, I'm like, it's the size of my hook, and I make sure as I'm going just like so, that like that loop on my hook is no bigger than what I want my single crochet to be. So once I have it there, I simply complete my single crochet. Does that make sense? I mean, it's a little bit extra information than what you would ever find in a pattern, but it's just a little tip to help you out and get consistent ribbing. When you get to the end of the row, go ahead and chain one and turn, or turn and chain one, and then you will work back once again, working these single crochets into the back leg or the back loop of each one of these stitches. Okay? Now I've already worked up another swatch, so let me grab that and let's take a look. You can see here that I've worked up the collar completed for the smaller size all the way up. And so I repeated my second row working through the back leg or the back loop 31 more times. If you're making the larger sizes, obviously you'll follow those numbers. And I'm at the point now where I am going to follow the body instructions. So the first part of the instructions say I'm no longer going to use my G hook, so I could put that aside. And I'm supposed to grab my larger hook. And I got gauge with a size H or 8 or 5 millimeter hook. So I'm going to use this and I'm going to begin the first row of the body. So I will place that loop directly onto my larger hook. And following the instructions, I will chain one. So let's go ahead and chain one. And now I want to work 34 single crochets along the long edge of the ribbing. So I will evenly space 34 single crochets. Now, as you're placing these 34 single crochets in, you have to decide pretty much, how far apart do you want them to be? And it might be that you have one for each one of the ridges that you have, or maybe you do a little bit like 2 into 1 or something. I mean, you just do what works best for you. I tend to just work along and then I will count as I go and just make sure that my stitches look like they're evenly spaced out. And as far as how do I work into, I just stick my hook right along the edge and I just start crocheting. Okay, so I'm gonna just continue to do this all the way down the row. When I get to the end of the row, I like to put my last one like in that last loop that's available to me from the foundation. And so I have 34 single crochets working along this rib, and it says that I'm supposed to turn my work. Now the instructions for the size I'm making say that I should be following chart number 1, and that's the same for the medium size, but the large size says to follow along with chart number 2. The good news is the charts are simply there to get us that color work, but the technique used to follow either of the charts is the same. So my instructions will work for both of the charts. Looking at the chart, we can see chart number 1 is up here and chart number 2 is down here. And one of the number one differences between these two charts is not only the increases that are done on each, but you'll notice that on chart number 1, the size small starts inside here and the medium starts outside here. And that's important to note. If you print this chart out in color, you will be able to see that right along this point here, there is a faint red line, and that really indicates the rows that you will be following for the smaller size. Now, as you're reading through the instructions for the body, you will notice that it says, you will read these charts from right to left for the right side rows and from left to right for the wrong side rows. You will also notice that it points out that on row number 3 on both charts is where the first increase begins. And to work that increase, you will do 2 single crochets into 1 stitch. And you will end with 2 single crochets into 1 stitch. So, do you notice, let's look at this chart right down here. You notice as you start here on row number 1, you read this way, nothing changes. Row number 2, you read this way, and you see that there are some color changes there, those color boxes. So that indicates when you will change color. Then you get to number 3. You see how it's like that bump out right there? It looks like a jagged bit. That jagged bit is created because of your increase. So this gray stitch here and this gray stitch here will all go into this 1 stitch right there. As you continue on down row 3, again, you have color changes that you will work, and you will notice that these 2 stitches right here, this 1 red stitch and this 1 gray stitch, will go into that one stitch right there. And that gives you the bump out down there. So you increase at either side of the piece. The same thing is true for the pattern for chart number 1. You with me so far? Now remember, if you're reading chart number 1 and you're making the size small, you will begin your chart following along this faint red line in there. You could get a Sharpie and really just, bold out the line there if you want. Or you can continue reading in the instructions and you'll see that it says that the first increase is there on number 3. And then for the size small, you would repeat that increase for the next 2 right side rows. So you'll do it on row 3, you'll do it on row 5, you'll see there's a bump out right there, and you'll do it on row 7, there's a bump out right there. So for the size small, there's only 2 more. For the size medium, there are 6 more, which is why you have bump outs all the way up to row 15. And for the size large, you have 10 more, which is why you have bump outs all the way up to row 23, right up there, 23, okay? So that's what those little bump out jagged edge means. That means you're gonna place 2 single crochets into 1 stitch. Now, the hardest part, I think, about that is if one of those single crochets needs to be a different color. The good news is once you know how to change colors as indicated in the pattern, you will easily be able to change colors as you're making one stitch a different color from the other stitch, even though you're working both of those stitches in the same stitch from the row below. That might seem a little confusing here to start. It'll make a lot more sense here as we get to the actual piece. Now, before I jump to that, I do want to point one more thing out on the chart. It is very easy to get lost on this chart, so I highly recommend grabbing some Post-it notes and use Post-it notes to your advantage. So for me, I'm making the size small, so I would go ahead and I would come over here and I would put a Post-it note there and a Post-it note all the way over here, just so that I remember I'm not looking at those outside stitches. I'm looking at my stitches right in here. Along with these, I would use a Post-it note to help me know what row I'm on. And I don't mark my rows like this. I don't mark them like this, like, oh, I finished that one, I'm gonna mark it. I mark them in this manner. And the reason I do that is as I am reading along a pattern, so let's say I'm right here, so this is row 3. So I can see right here on row 3, I have a gray stitch and a red stitch, which will go into one gray. Then I have a gray that works into a gray. And then I have a gray that works into a red. Then I have a gray that works into a gray, a red that works into a gray, so on and so forth. It's just another way to double check the way you are crocheting. So what I would do is I would take this particular, Post-it note, I just forgot the word completely. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I am actually on row 7. That's where I'm going to pick up my work and demonstrate how to do the color changes and the increase. So I am going to place my Post-it note right there. I'll just do one all the way across just so I get it all the way across. And I can see that. Does that make sense? So the Post-it notes, use those to your advantage. Now, if you're not printing out the pattern and you keep it on your computer or you keep it on your tablet or your phone, you could always expand the image so that you can easily see what color goes into what stitch. And when you're working with a stranded or a Fair Isle type stitch pattern like this, it's sort of like a paint by number. It's when you get to that stitch, whatever stitch you're on, whatever color block that is on the chart, that's the color you're going to make that stitch. What you have to remember though is that on the stitch previous to that block, on the final draw through, that's when you will change colors. All right, so this is what we are going to do. Let's take a look at what I've worked up so far. I have worked up the chart for the size small through row 6, and I'm getting ready to start row 7. The very first row was just a plain single crochet row all the way across without any color changes. It was on row 2 as we worked across that we introduced these color, I call them color blips, but those are the blocks that showed the different color, the red colors. On row 3, that's where we worked our increase. That's where we have our main color in the first stitch and then our color blip color in the second stitch. And both of those were worked into one stitch. And then we work across following along with the pattern. As you work the stitches across the row, you will actually crochet over the color you're not using. So I am going to start showing you how to do this technique and how to work an increase starting on row 7. And you will be able to take this knowledge and apply it beginning on row 2, only you will increase on rows 3, 5, 7, so on and so forth, depending on the size you are making, okay? This is a way to make sure the video isn't super long, right? So I am on row 7 and I finished with my contrast color B in the last stitch of my row 6. And I can see that the first 3 stitches of my row 7 are going to be with this same color. But it's also a kick out, which means the first 2 stitches are going to be placed into one stitch. Now I'm still going to take my yarn that I'm not using and carry it along my row. So this is my contrast color A. I'm going to rest it on the top of my work so that way when it's time to change to that color, it will be ready for me. And I do that right here at the very beginning. So there's 1 and here's 2. Okay, so that first one was the kick out. That's the one that's sort of like it's already in line with the chart that we've been going. And then I have a third one. So this will be my third. But it's at this one that I stop at the end of the final, before the final pull through, and I switch to my contrast color B, or the color indicated in the pattern, and I pull through. What that does is it puts the color that I'm going to be using next on my hook, and it finishes off the color I was using. Now the next stitch is going to be made with the color on my hook. I yarn over, pull up a loop, but the following stitch is done with this color. So I drop that color, contrast color A, I pick up contrast color B, and I finish off the pull through. Does that make sense? All right, so let's do that again. I have to do 3 single crochets with my contrast color B. So there's 1, oops, here's 2, and this will be my third. But in the final draw through of this third, I'm going to drop the color I was using and pick up the next color that I need to use and pull through. Now I'll do 1 stitch with contrast color A, but I'm not going to complete that stitch. Again, I'm going to drop that color, pick up the color of the next stitch of the row, and finish off. And then I do my gray. Now right here, if the next color was this pink color, the contrast color A, I would yarn over with that, but it's not. It's the next color is gray. So I will continue on and just make my 3 stitches all in the gray. Does that make sense? And again, I'm just looking at the chart and I'm making sure that I am placing the correct color in each stitch. Now, did you see there? I almost pulled through when I shouldn't have. I almost forgot to change colors, but I caught myself. And as you're working, what you will notice is when you change colors the way I'm showing you, you will only have that color blip in one of the V's, or at one spot at the top of the stitch. Okay, so I'm going to continue following my pattern all the way down to the very end, and I will work an increase down here at the very end also. I am coming up to the end of my row 7, and I want to show you that I have 3 stitches of my contrast color B, and then I end with 1 stitch of my contrast color A. So I have 1 stitch remaining, which means I want to put 2 stitches into that 1. So I will work with my contrast color B first, finish it off with my contrast color A, and then work my contrast color A into that same stitch. Okay? And if I put this down, you can see that I have 3 stitches in between each color blip, so to speak, along that row. So what I just showed you on row 7 is how to increase at the beginning, how to increase at the end, and how to change colors. That way you are doing the correct color in the correct stitch following along with the chart. It's at this point we need to go back to our original set of instructions that told us to go and look at the chart and see what it is we're supposed to do once we get past all of our increases. So let's go ahead and bring that back into the screen. Okay, we've already gone over the number of times you will be working your increase on the right side after you do it on the 3rd row. This right here, that is the total number of stitches you will have after you've worked those increases, okay? Now, after you've done that, you will work either 3 rows even, 1 row even, or 1 row even, depending on the size you're making. And all that means is you're not going to do any increases. You're just going to follow along with the chart, okay? Once you've done that, you'll see that you are ending on a row 10 for the small, a row 16 for the medium, a row 24 for the large. Now, this is where it starts to get interesting because we are going to create a leg opening in our sweaters. But in the size small and the size medium, our leg opening happens while we're still working our color work in our chart. For the larger size, it happens after all the color work is done, so you don't have to worry too much about it. But when we're working with the small and the medium, we really need to pay attention to what's going on in our chart still with the color changes, making it a little bit more difficult, but not undoable. Is that even a word? I think it's a word. Okay, let's take a look. Right down here, you can see that this set of instructions and this set of instructions are for the size small and the medium. So right here, beginning on row 11 for the small and row 17 for the medium, we will chain 1 and we will work our pattern across either 5 stitches for the small or 8 stitches for the medium. Then we will turn our work. That's going to leave all of the stitches unworked. So let's take a peek here. So this would be row 11 right here, right? So here's my little line that I need to pay attention to. So I will work 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches, and then I'm going to leave all of that unworked. For the medium, I'm on row 17, and I leave 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stitches, and I leave all of these unworked. I do want to point out, do you see that dark black line there that indicates a square? So that's the leg opening for the size medium. This red line right here, that's the leg opening for the small. I almost missed that leg opening there for the medium. I barely saw it, but it's there. So you can see as you're working across, you see exactly what the stitches are as you're going back and forth, okay? So we turn our work. So we've turned our work. Then it says keeping continuation of chart 1. Work a further 5 or 7 rows from the chart. Do not fasten off. Now that we know we have to work over a set number of stitches and then turn our work, let's go ahead and do that. And this is a reminder, I finished on a row 7, which means I am going to work 3 more rows even. That means just without increases, following along with my chart for the size small. And I can see that on my row 8, I'm beginning with my contrast color B. So I chained 1 with my color B and turn. And I want to make sure I do carry this yarn, my opposite color. So I'm going to make sure it gets up there as I work my single crochet in the first 2, and then just carry on with my color. So I'm going to get through these 3 rows, and then we can see what we need to do to get that leg opening. And we are back. I have worked evenly through row 10 for the size small, and I'm ready to carry on starting with my leg opening. Now I'm going to work with the size small, which means I'm still following along with the size small chart, and I'm just going to work across 5 stitches. So if I'm looking right here, 5 stitches will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I have the contrast color C, so C, 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 and then B, and then C. All right, so here we go. I'm right here, so we start off, let me move this out of the way. I will get my chain 1 And I do want to note that as I was working along, when it became time to change colors, I did cut the yarn and then rejoin rather than carrying up the side. I just prefer to do it that way, so it's a personal preference for me. But here we go. So I've chained one and I'm going to turn, and I will go ahead, grab my contrast color B right here and lay it on my work, because that is where it's going to start before it gets joined in. So I start off with 1, 2, and in my third one, this is where I will switch out and change colors. You guys know how to do this at this point. And this would be 4. Make sure I change colors here, because number 5 is this color once again. All right, so this would be my 5. So those 5 stitches right there, that's all I'm going to complete for this first part. Then I'll go ahead, I'll chain 1 and turn, and I'm going to continue on working this for another 5 rows for the size small, 8 rows for the size medium, and 11 rows for the size large. It's at that point that you are done. So that would put me at row 16 for this size. It would put me at row 24 for the medium, which is the end of the chart. All right, so it's pretty easy once you go back and forth with this. Once this little bit is made up, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and finish up this little bit so I can show you how you will skip stitches and add yarn right here, so that way we have a leg opening. So let me get those 5 rows completed. Okay, I have completed through row 16, and I know the pattern says do not fasten off, but I'm going to be a rebel. I am cutting the yarn and I'm going to fasten off because I need to use this yarn for the other section. So I just can't leave it hanging out there. So I'm going to go ahead and fasten off. And what I will do is I will rejoin my yarn when it's time right there into that stitch with a standing single crochet or a chain 1 and a single crochet. So I'm going to mark that stitch so I know where it was, where I finished off. Now the instructions can be confusing because it says rows 16 for the small or rows 24 for the medium of the chart are complete for the right side. And you might be like, but wait a minute, the odd rows were right side rows. Well, what they really mean is the right side of the sweater. Meaning if I turn this so that the public side of the sweater, what we have been calling the right side, this is the right side of the sweater, the right edge of the sweater. So that edge is complete. So what we are going to do now is, if we were looking at our chart here, do you remember, I should say, that square right there that we talked about, that it's like an inset square for the smaller size. There's the larger black square for the medium size. Those squares, those are the sections we're going to leave open for our leg openings. So essentially, when the instructions say to rejoin yarn and skip 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches, it's saying those 4 stitches right there in that square. And so we're going to complete from this stitch all the way over to this stitch right before this next square. So this is our center section. Can you see what I mean here? So we're going to join our yarn and work across those stitches right there. Those would be 22 stitches for the small, 34 stitches for the medium. And you'll work back and forth all the way up through row 16. Okay, so what this will do is it'll leave that opening of 4 stitches for the doggy's leg and 4 stitches for the doggy's leg. And you would actually leave 7 stitches up here for the medium for the doggy's leg and 7 stitches over here for the medium for the doggy's leg. Once we complete this center section, we will then skip 4 stitches and then complete the left side of the sweater. So we already know how to do this. I'm going to show you how to count across and then how to rejoin. You already know how to do all of the color work and stuff here. And once I show you how to do that, you'll know how to do this side here with those 5 stitches right there. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to show you this part right now. So I'm coming back down to what would be row 11, and I'm going to go from where I turned and count over 4 stitches for the size small. If you were making the medium, you would count over 7 stitches. Okay, so here we are. I have the right side facing. This would have been my row 11. I started right here. And so that was my row 11 that I did for the right edge. So this is where I would count 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. So in this stitch right here, this is the stitch I'm going to rejoin the yarn and continue on with the stitch pattern. So I'll chain 1 and I'll continue on with the chart over the next 22 stitches. So I've got to pull my chart down here. I've got to bring my post-it note back into play for me because I don't know where things are. And I'm going to continue on. So I continue on between this point and that point right there. So, and I'm on 11, so I'm on a right side, so I'm going to read from right to left, which means I start off with 2 colors, contrast colors C, and then 1 of B. So here I go. To join the yarn, you simply will take your yarn, go into the stitch you're supposed to join, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then going just like that joins it. And then we're going to chain 1. Now, don't forget, we also want to bring in our other color we're working with so that we can work around those stitches. Let me make sure I have the right part here. All right, so I'm just going to lay the other color I'm using right on top. And I'm going to work across these stitches. So this first one, it is a single crochet. There's 1. And you would weave in these tails before we do any sort of seaming. So right now they're just kind of hanging out there, but we will continue on. So I will do my second one, and this is where I would change colors, just like we've been doing all along, right? So we know how to do this. It's just that now we have to be able to count across the number of rows we're supposed to do. I always get so excited and I always accidentally finish off that one stitch with the incorrect color. All right, there we are. So I'm going to work across the number of stitches I need to do, and you will do the same on yours. All right, so I'm going to count just to make sure. And I know that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of my blips, and I started off with 2 of my color C, and I finished with 3 of my color C. All right, so it's at this point I would carry on and work through row 16. Once I finish that, again, I would fasten off because then I'm going to come over here once again with my right side facing, and when it's time to work the left edge, I will skip 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches. I will rejoin my yarn right here and work these stitches. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get through all of that so that way I can show you how to reconnect the right side, the left side, and the center all again and continue on with the pattern. Beyond that, once you get through this color work portion of the chart, that's really the most complex portion of this pattern. Everything else is really simple. It's single crochets, it's single crochet 2 together, and then it's making bands for the legs and then seaming it up. You know how to do all of that stuff. That part's not hard. It's really understanding this first part of the, essentially the yoke of the sweater for the dog. Getting through this part, once you get past the front legs, it's easy peasy. So that's the part we're going to really concentrate on. So let me get through these rows for the center and for the left side, because you know how to do that now. And then we will jump in to reconnect it all. And we're back, and I have a finished center back panel and the left side of the sweater. So I have the completed like yoke portion of the sweater done, and I have an opening here for the legs. So remember, I did go ahead and fasten off down here at the end of my right side because I needed to use that yarn over here for these 2 sections. So I will be joining my yarn right here, following along with the chart, and I'm going to continue following, let's see, that would be row 17, and we're going to follow row 17 of the chart, but we will work across these 5 stitches, and then we will chain 4, and then work across these 22 stitches, chain 4, and then work across these stitches. Of course, that's for the size small. For the size medium and the size large, it's essentially the same process. You'll work across the right edge stitches, chain some to go across the gap for the leg, work across the back stitches, chain some to work across from the leg, and then work the left edge of the body. So all of this is all very same as far as technique. So let's see how this works. And remember, you're still following along with the chart for the size small. For the medium and the large, you're just already off to just one solid color, so you don't have to worry about the color of your work. But for this one, we have to. So let's see, my first color over here starts with my contrast color A, so that would be this. So I'm going to go ahead and take my marker out, still using my larger hook, and I will join with a slip stitch just so that I have it in there, okay? And then I'll carry on with the chain one. So I'm also going to be using my main color across this row, so I want to make sure that I have that yarn laying on top of those stitches. And we are ready to go. So I'm going to follow with the chart on row 17. The right side of the piece is facing me. So I begin with a single crochet. Oops, I got to pull through the other color here. Let's get through these 5 stitches. And then I do a single crochet with this color. We know how to do this by this point. I want to show you how to get across the leg. That's my main concern here. So 1 and 2 and 3. Now here's the tricky part. I'm supposed to chain 4, but what color do I use to chain my 4? I'm not really sure if I'm supposed to try and chain the same color of what the stitch should be, or just get those stitches across and get them started right here. So here's what I'm gonna do. I know that my first stitch over here of my 22 for the small is supposed to be my main color. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to finish off this one. And then I'm gonna chain 4, and I'm gonna make sure that my last chain I do will be with this main color so it's on my hook. So I will chain 1, and then I'll grab this one, and there's chain 2, and then I'll chain 3, and then I'll do a chain 4, and that makes that color the last on my hook, which is what I want. So when I come over here to the first stitch of my 22, it's supposed to be with my main color, so I can bring my other color over and work that main color stitch just like I normally would. Now it looks a little goofy right there. The good news is we do a simple edging around that leg opening, and then you sew on a ribbing just like this if you want. So that's all gonna get hidden, but that's how I managed to get all of my chains across, or I should say get both colors across with the chains. And now I just carry on with the pattern until I get to the next leg, and I will do the same thing. Okay, so here I am again. I need to get across, and my first stitch over here is going to be with my contrast color A. So I will go ahead and let's just get across. There's 1 chain, there's 2 chain, there's 3 chain, and let's carry this up. And there's 4 chain, and then we come over here, we get into stitch number 5, get in there, make sure that color is laying down, and we complete our stitch. See how this is working up? I mean, again, I could be overcomplicating it when it comes to the chains, but it seems to be working for me, so hopefully it's also working for you this way to get those stitches across, and it should be just fine here as we come up to the end. So I'll get the last 2 stitches on mine, and as I mentioned, with the size medium and the size large, like, you don't have to worry about all these color changes. You just have one color you're dealing with. But for the small, we're still doing these color changes. So you can see we are back to where we have a full row of stitches happening here, and you have the correct stitch count given in the pattern. For the size small, we have a little bit more work to do. We have to continue on working evenly in the chart pattern all the way through row 24. It's at that point that we can carry on and get to the part where it's for all of the sizes. Just a quick note, if you watched me do the size small joining row, you can very easily work the medium large joining row because you don't have any color work and it's the same process. I did not mention that you're supposed to put markers at the end of the last row, and that's going to give you a point at which you can measure from. So if you have this open, you could always measure from right there at your opening. If you don't have markers, you can measure from right there at the opening. If you have markers, simply just mark the end of that last row, and then you have a place at which you can measure from. Because once you get past the joining row, you then will work back and forth in single crochets until the piece measures about 4.5 inches for the small, 7 inches for the medium, or 10.5 inches for the large past the joining row or past your markers. Once you reach those measurements, you begin shaping the back, okay? So what does that mean? Let's take a look over here. Since I don't have a completed sweater yet, and I want you to be able to see what I'm talking about. This is the back of the sweater, right? This is the back of the sweater. This is the belly of the sweater. So you're working from your joining row, which would be right about there, and you're working until it's 4.5, 7.5, or 10, or whatever it was. And then it's at that point you're doing the shaping. So that's where you will begin to single crochet 2 together at the points indicated in the pattern. And it just gives you this little shape here. So that way the back end of the sweater, this back end here, can kind of go down and reach the tail of the dog. Now, do you have to do this shaping part? No. Is it going to fit better if you do? Absolutely. And they're simple stitches. I know you can do it. We don't have to waste our time going through that here. Honestly, I feel like by this point, if you've managed it this far, you can do the rest of the instructions, okay? So when you do the shaping stitches, just as I mentioned, you shape the back and you just continue following those instructions, okay? Then you will sew the belly seam from the neck ribbing at the beginning to the back shaping. So again, you will sew from the ribbing all the way across the belly right down here to the back. It's at that point you will come back over here to these leg openings that we have, and you will work stitches around the leg opening so you have something to stitch into, and then you will make 2 more of these ribbings and then sew them to those openings. The last thing that the designer has you do is add a little bit of trim around this opening here. So once it's all seamed together, you would do this back edging, and it's literally just single crochets all the way around this back portion. And as I mentioned, the leg edging, that is around this leg, and then the leg bands, those are the ribbing portions, and you just sew those on. So when it comes to the Crochet Family Dog Sweater, I feel like I've shown you the hardest parts. This is one of those patterns that it seems like it might be a little bit easy, but really the color work can throw you for a spin if you're not careful. Could you take this pattern and instead of doing any of the color work, just keep straight single crochet in one color? You absolutely could. It's a great pattern. You could easily do that. I would leave that completely up to you. All right, so that's it for this video as far as instructions. I am gonna go ahead, finish up my sweater, and then I will show you the finished look on my dog, Lucy. This is my little chihuahua, Lucy, and you know I made the size small sweater, and I bet I could have made the medium for her, but she still looks cute and was a trooper trying it on. Oh my goodness, isn't that just the cutest little sweater? I love it when I finish dog sweaters and I can put them on my dog, Lucy. She makes everything simply adorable. I really hope you learned something new with this video and it helps you out when you endeavor to make your very first Crochet Family Dog Sweater. If you are making this sweater, please share with us on social media. Use hashtag MarleyBird or hashtag Yarnspirations so we can see your project and smash your like button. That's it for me, everybody. Once again, I'm Marley Bird for Yarnspirations.com. Talk to you later. Bye. Thanks so much for joining me on the Marley Bird YouTube channel. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to hit subscribe. I've put a link right over there, or you can watch a couple of the videos I've already selected for you right down there. If you want to follow me on social media, I've put my links right over there. You could have all Marley all the time. Bye guys.